Welcome to Commune, a global wellness community and online course platform featuring some of the world's greatest teachers. We are on a mission to inspire, heal, pass down wisdom, and bring the world closer together. This is the Commune podcast, where each week we explore the ideas and practices that help us live this healthy, connected, and purpose-filled life. In addition to our courses on yoga, meditation, and personal development, Commune also offers an array of social impact courses, including Unwinding Prejudice, Redefining Leadership, and Organize March. If you are interested in enrolling in any of those course offerings for free, please email me at jeffk@onecommune.com. We can all benefit from learning and growing in order to better serve our communities. So this week, we're talking about something ubiquitous that we barely notice. I'm referring to plastic. My guest today, Kate Nelson, is a special person, though she doesn't think of herself as completely human. You'll know what I mean in a minute. But she is special because of the work that she does in making people aware of the harm of plastics on our personal and planetary health. Kate collected plastic from the Great Pacific Trash Gyre, the massive conglomeration of plastic refuse in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, measuring about 2 times the size of Texas. She's lobbied government officials, spoken at scholarly institutions, founded an environmental nonprofit, and has personally stopped using disposable plastic for 10 years. That means no straws, water bottles, plastic shopping bags, shampoo bottles, makeup containers. The list goes on, and it's frankly amazing to see how much of our everyday lives are riddled by disposable single-use plastic. Kate also has a book out. It's called I Quit Plastics, and You Can Too. And on today's show, we'll talk about just that, how we can alter our habits to take better care of ourselves and our planet. My name is Jeff Krasno, and welcome to Commune.
Hello, I'm Kate. I'm Plastic-Free Mermaid. I'm a mermaid, and I haven't used single-use plastics for a decade. So I teach that lifestyle. I teach how not to use plastics. I teach about the science, the reasons why we shouldn't use plastics. And then I'm a mermaid, so I free dive and I surf and I sail and I love the ocean.
And you didn't just wake up one day 10 years ago and just say magically, plastic-free mermaid. You know, right? This sort of like would not be a normal response to humanity. So I'm wondering what experience in your life led you to make that decision?
Yeah. So I was volunteering at a nonprofit in Santa Barbara in college, and I learned it was Jean-Michel Cousteau's Ocean Future Society, and I was working for a scientist there. Her name's Dr. Andrea Neal, and she was studying microorganisms ingesting microplastics, which I had no idea, no context for what that meant. So she had to back up and explain to me that plastic does not biodegrade. It takes about 1,000 years to break down into the environment. And in that lifespan of 1,000 years, it doesn't just break down like a banana peel, but it breaks up into millions of tiny little fragments or pieces. First, the size of a fingernail, like a macroplastic, then smaller, like the size of a sesame seed, like a microplastic, and then beyond, we can't even see it with the human eye anymore. It's a nanoplastic, and then it's working. These little bits make their way out into the ocean, and they're ingested by microorganisms as well as a range of sea creatures, which then works its way up the food chain. So there's so much science around this, but that understanding that plastic does not biodegrade was shocking to me. Because I was in college, so I was, smoothie cups and red Solo beer cups at parties and all this plastic.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot turn your head
right
in modern society without seeing plastic. In fact, that I know my wife sort of has this disease of, I don't know, it's yet to be named. Maybe you can help her name it. When she walks into a room, she is surveying the room now for essentially single-use plastics.
She's seen The Matrix.
Yes, she's seen The Matrix. So, and then you traveled out to what I believe is like the big gyre in the Pacific. Is that right?
Yeah.
And, you know, I think the images of that have started to be popularized, but the size of it is just sort of beyond comprehension. I've seen like the size of France or the size of Texas. I mean, tell us a little bit about that experience.
Oh man. I mean, and they're all over the world too, these gyres. So what it is it's our currents, our trash maybe gets blown into the ocean or travels along rivers and streams and makes its way out to the ocean, and then it floats out at sea and then makes its way into a current, and then those currents travel around the world and then they converge in places. They run into each other and they form these large whirlpool-like systems between continents in those great open spaces. And they're these big swirling whirlpool-like systems, and all the trash collects there. And it creates this kind of dead spot where life can't really survive because there's big chunks of marine litter like nets and rope and discarded laundry tubs and just huge bits of plastic, and then it's all broken down into these tiny little bits. So then it's kind of this soup. So it's not, when Captain Charles Moore first discovered this about 11 or so years ago, it was sensationalized and people thought it was this floating island.
Right. And
so this is why we have to be careful about how we report facts and things, because everyone's like, this plastic island, you can go stand on it. And you can't. It's more of a soup. And so I was shocked and went out to visit it, and took a sample, and it was just this, you can't separate out those plastics because they're the same size as the phytoplankton. How do you clean that? And these are all over the world. There's currents all over. So there's these little tiny gyres all over the world, and about 5 or 6 main gyres.
Yeah.
So.
I was reading a little bit about the evolution and the invention of plastic. And, obviously plastic is amongst the biggest problems to solve right now. Yeah. But initially it was actually invented to solve a problem, which was somewhat, as I understand it, sort of conservationist in essence, which was we were using, and this might be great mythology, so you have to help us, because essentially we were using raw materials from nature like ivory, tortoise shells, obviously wood, for a whole variety of devices and trinkets and everything that man uses. This is sometime in the early 1900s, I believe, and that, there was all this human innovation around creating this polymer substance to essentially conserve.
Right.
But that no longer seems like a relevant concept.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think we got excited about this new technology, and instead of, and especially in wartime, it proved so convenient. It proved such a useful material. It was so durable and weather resistant, and so, and light. So for soldiers to be carrying, cases and different parts of their uniform to be made of this material was really useful. And so, again, it was serving a purpose more than like metal or heavier materials would use. And then at home, back in the States at least, with most of the men away at war, the women were entering the workforce, and they also had to take care of the family and cook food. So plastic was, how convenient. We can make packaged food in this and make disposable plates and silverware. So again, it was like, this is serving a need. It's serving this, we're conserving time and energy and supporting the women. And it was good. It was seen as this solution, but we didn't consider the consequences of the scale with which we were rolling it out, the vast quantity, the amount of single use, and where it was all going to end up.
Yeah. One of the things that I think that you talk about that I really find fascinating is it's a little bit more philosophical in nature. And, if you look at the invention of plastics as to, in some ways, provide this convenient tool that used to be provided by nature. And in a way, we have gotten so personally divorced from nature that we see our identity as completely separate from it. And because we're separate from it, we feel like we have dominion over it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. I think that a lot of people are feeling this disconnection and this separation. And it's ironic because we're never separate from nature. We always are connected to nature. We breathe air, we drink water, we eat food that grows from soil. But you're right, we've created all of these synthetic barriers. We've built houses around ourselves and walls, and we pump synthetic air through our buildings, and we package our food in synthetic materials. So we've manufactured that separation. And you're right, it's given us this sort of like us and them, this separation that again is something of our own invention. So when we start to come back to, oh wow, we actually, we want herbs as our medicine and teas as our medicine, or we're taking all these supplements and all of these natural foods to get our energy, or we're paying all this money to go on medicine retreats, or paying all this money for a week for a yoga retreat, and we're trying to reconnect or tune into this higher, this self, or go inside and like heal and do all this healing from all of the years we spent disconnected.
Yeah.
It's so ironic because we certainly were never actually disconnected. It was a mental framework that we created.
Yeah, completely. And even from a genetic perspective, we are more bacteria and fungi than we actually are ourselves.
Trillions of bacteria.
Yeah, I mean, when they mapped the human genome, I think in the 90s, and they were assuming because we are these brilliant, complex beings that they would come back and we would have millions of genes. Well, it turned out we only had 20,000 or so, and that led to, well, what is going on? How are we functioning from a digestive perspective and all this other stuff? And now you've seen over the last 10 years this kind of efflorescence in the research and study around microbiome, and more of that DNA. So we're really more, even our corporeal physical selves are more nature than they are truly us.
Right. They're mostly dirt and water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different kinds of plastics out there, and I think just from my my sort of neophyte perspective, I look on the bottom and there's different numbers, and what does all that signify? Or does it mean actually anything, and is it just like a myth to confuse us?
It is a myth.
Yeah.
It's one of my kind of favorite myths to bust around these false solutions to our waste problems. When we started using plastic for all these, in World War II, for at home disposable materials, forks and plates, recycling was invented by the plastics industry. So Big Oil was like, okay, how do we make people feel better about all this plastic that they're just throwing away? Oh, let's create a separate bin for all of these materials and say, don't worry, we're going to repurpose, we're going to recycle these things into equal materials. But now we know that it's not actually being recycled. Things get downcycled, plastic can be downcycled, but unlike metal and glass and paper that can be recycled into something of equal value, plastic can't really, because there's so many different types. And amongst those types, even, PET, polyethylene terephthalate, which is the most commonly recycled, plastic water bottles.
Is that number one?
Number one.
Yeah.
Number one. But they use that in making food packaging as well. And even those, it's crusted with soda, or it has a sticky glue on it from a label, or it has color printed onto it, ink printed onto it, or it's been dyed with another color, or it has phthalates, different chemical additives to give it different characteristics like rigidity or opaqueness or something.
Right.
So it's this one plastic, PET, but it's got all these different things in it, so it's really hard for it to be a pure material like simply glass or metal.
When you say downcycled, what does that actually mean?
So when they say 9% has been recycled, they mean downcycled.
They mean downcycled.
Yeah.
Okay. And downcycled is essentially taking that plastic and making it into some other plastic.
Some other plastic.
That then does not generally decompose well, right?
Oh, correct. Oh, yeah. It's not going to break down because like these pure PET bottles are made from virgin plastics. And when you recycle these plastics, because there's so many contaminants in it, when you melt something down, it's got all these different, and even, plastic leaches, as we were talking about earlier, but it also is absorbent, so it absorbs toxins in its environment. So recycling plastic into something that we could eat or drink out of just is unsafe. Yeah. And there's not regulation around this yet. So this happens a lot. We're so innovative as humans, and so we get excited and we want to, recycle it and use this here and there, but then the policy or the legislation can't keep up with our innovation. The science can barely keep up. We release a study and then business and technology evolves, and we haven't yet been able to regulate or create meaningful legislation around these things to protect us, protect our health, our environment.
Yeah, I mean, there are these kind of global pacts. I mean, I think the Paris Treaty addressed some of this stuff, but, countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, I don't really think are heeding some of the guidelines.
But that's the really interesting part about this, is because Southeast Asia is where the Western countries ship our trash.
Yeah.
So they get a bad rap, but it's because we are sending our trash to these countries that don't have the waste management systems in place. I mean, that's when this becomes not just an environmental injustice, but more of a social injustice, because why are they supposed to be responsible for the trash of the world?
Right. So this sounds like kind of an obvious question. Sort of like an analytic truth, like a bachelor is unmarried or something. But what is single-use plastic?
Disposable, one-time use. So you use it once and then you throw it away.
Yeah.
Which was really interesting for me when I first quit single-use plastic, because I was like, straws, bags, bottles, done. And then I was realizing as I was shopping that all the food packaged in plastic, that's single-use. Even the shampoo bottles and the makeup containers, the packaging around my technology, like all of that is single-use plastic, because you just unwrap it or you use your shampoo for a couple months and then you throw that container away.
Right. So it's pervasive and insidious, really. I mean, you gave a few examples of perhaps not the obvious single-use plastics, because I think there's a general movement against using sort of plastic bags at grocery stores. And I suppose that's incremental progress. But it really...
Unfortunately.
Yeah, in a way, because it's sort of greenwashing some of the other issues. But I mean, when you think of like the biggest single-use plastics that people might not think of, I mean, health and beauty aid industry, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard to narrow it down, because, I mean, that's why we're doing a course on it, right? There's so much plastic that we don't even realize around us. Like, I look around here, and I think the one that is most shocking is our clothing. And that's not single use, because we wear our clothing over and over again. But if I think about what's the most shocking amount of plastic that we use and we're contributing to plastic pollution, it's when we wash our clothing, thousands of little threads, synthetic threads are shaken loose. Little threads are shaken loose of natural clothing as well. But it's when they're synthetic that they're ending up, they're out the laundry machine, out into the waterways, and that goes out into the ocean because the treatment plants aren't able to separate those fibers out. Yeah. These little fibers weave their way into the gastrointestinal tract, and then because plastic itself is toxic, so it's in the environment, it's piling up as pollution, it's leaching its toxins into the ground and the soil, the groundwater. It's also shedding these little microfibers, and also any packaging is shedding microplastics, these little particles that then are being ingested by wildlife, and these negative impacts, which I'll get to, bioaccumulate or get bigger as other creatures eat them, and they make their way up the food chain. So if we're eating fish, if we're eating meat that have been eating plastic, all of those negative toxins are bigger in our bodies. So what are these negative toxins?
So there's plastic in this thing here?
Yeah. Yeah, that thing. That's why I was thinking maybe if you're not fully human, maybe you're half plastic.
Oh, you were setting me up.
Good. You seem like you're doing a pretty good job.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
No problem. So plastic's shedding these little microfibers, and it also leaches. So it is it's attracted to fat. So if it's storing anything with fat in it, the container is going to leach into that food or that drink. So if you have a latte, with milk in there, it's going to leach to that milk. If it's storing anything that's hot, so if you're storing hot food into plastic Tupperware, or you're getting takeout in a plastic box, or you're microwaving food in plastic, the plastic chemicals are going to transfer into your food or drink. And if something's sitting on a shelf for a really long time in plastic, like duration of time in that plastic, it's going to leach. And what these chemicals do, we're finding, is they actually act like estrogen in our bodies. So when we ingest these foods or drink these drinks that are contaminated with the plastics, they travel through our bloodstream and trigger all of our estrogen sensors or receptors around our body, and this disrupts our endocrine system and eventually our reproductive systems, and leads to all sorts of diseases, which I can talk about.
Well, before you talk about that, because I'm very squeamish about anything medical, so I might have to go off camera for that particular piece. I believe in the general, I'm an optimist, and I believe that it's people in their general nature are good.
Yes.
And they, when confronted with this kind of problem, people can feel paralyzed by the enormity of it, and they simply just go numb. So what would you say to that person that is paralyzed by the enormity of the problem? What can they do?
Baby steps. Well, first of all, quit the obvious ones. Quit single-use plastic bags, bring your own bags. Quit using single-use plastic water bottles or drink bottles, bring your own bottle. And if you forget these things, get resourceful, go without, or use a cup, try and find some other vessel, or use a cardboard box at the grocery store to get your groceries out. Bring your own coffee cup, start bringing your reusables, build those habits. Change where you shop at the farmers markets, support local makers, artisans, makers of, vegan coconut yogurt or something, like research and find people that are making these things and support those small local food movements. Shop bulk, go to the refill centers, bring your own containers, set your own up at your home, like find these suppliers and just order a large bag of beans and keep it in your basement, and then you can just refill for yourself. So just changing how we're consuming. So instead of just blindly consuming and trusting all these corporations that are delivering us all these packaged products, kind of coming back into ourselves and seeing how we can make little changes day to day. Bring our own materials, make things at home. I make all my bath products. I make much of my food products at home.
So it sounds like what you're espousing is a more sacred way of living. And I'm curious, as you started to instantiate more of these plastic-free habits into your life, how did that change you holistically?
Yeah, beautiful question. I think that is definitely the mindset that we want to take when we approach quitting something as pervasive and ubiquitous as plastic. That instead of what I did, which was kind of this just huge quit, like I'm done with this forever, which was extreme.
Guillotine approach to plastic.
Yeah, which, of course, as I said, I then continued to be a learning journey as I realized what that meant. And but yeah, it's just approaching this as we are connected to nature. Like, we are not better or bigger than anything in nature. In fact, we are connected. We're a part of this. And just creating that holistic appreciation is so fulfilling and rewarding. And that's what makes these changes sustainable. Because it can be really overwhelming to think, I have to make all my stuff. I have to bring things. I don't know how I'm going to change my routine. But when you look at this as like this beautiful, holistic lifestyle, that all makes sense. That all is easy. It's like, of course, I'm going to make my own face balms and lip balms and body butters, because it's part of my process. It's part of this quality of life that I'm choosing.
Do you feel in order to make really systemic change, there's going to be we need a fuckload of mermaids, right?
We do. We need to build an army.
And that is hard in the face of essentially a hyper-commodified capitalist system that relies on efficiency, that essentially strips the world of the sacred.
Right.
Because the sacred is unique. It's making, your own pie at home instead of buying it in a plastic container or something like that. But when we live in a culture that essentially is based on a system that consistently tells you that you are not enough,
right,
and then markets trinkets and devices for you to address those perceived deficiencies, really you need a grassroots revolution to change the systems and structures by which we live and by which we're governed. And I'm curious, like, how one does that. I mean, you're certainly doing it by example. I mean, and I think of, like, is it purely a grassroots movement? Does environmentalism and sustainability sort of have a marketing problem? And I wonder if you could kind of talk to how you can create the critical mass to overturn these systems and structures that are deeply embedded in our society.
That's why I love the health and wellness movement. I love that people are starting to put their money where their mouth is. They're really, and yes, it's being taken advantage of, and there's all sorts of marketing and trinkets that are catering to this new value of health and wellness. But it shows us that our values can be commoditized in a way, and that we can actually, that environmentalism can also be pitched and promoted as a way to serve our health and to serve our bodies. And that's why the angle around the science, the fact that that plastic is actually contaminating and poisoning us on a daily basis and affecting our reproductive, like leading to infertility and cancer and obesity and depression and all of these things that, we're actively trying to avoid by leading healthy lives. So I think getting this information out mainstream, and it's really interesting actually, because as I've been an activist in this space for a long time, and the grassroots movement feels so slow, and we'll get legislation passed and then it'll be overturned, or it won't be strong enough so it won't actually make a difference. And that's why I've chosen to go more into, okay, how do we inspire and teach people how to live this lifestyle, and kind of package it as this like magical, sacred, beautiful mermaid lifestyle, so that it's appealing, and we show people that it's actually easy and it's beautiful and it's rich. And hopefully the wealthier nations take this on, because the world mimics what we do. And so if we can reduce our plastic use, because it's so hard, the real solution to all of this is turning off the tap of plastics. So just stopping the extraction of oil and the production and the manufacture of all these plastic products. How do we do that? We try to target these corporations, but they're so, they've got immense resources. And there's plenty of great movements out there that are working towards that. And then we also try to do the cleanup and try and work with Southeast Asia and these different countries that all of our trash is ending up, and it's really leaking out into the environment there. So we try to figure out systems there as well. But what do? We work on the narrative. We work on changing our relationship to single-use plastics, so that can become a trend and that can become a movement with our communities that have real impact and influence.
Yeah, no, I think that is a good point of essentially changing the story. And that goes back to kind of this notion of the separate self.
Yeah.
That is our modern story, that I'm an individual living amongst other individuals in this separate and external universe that I'm only a part of but not connected to. That if we can effectively change the story to feel like more connected human beings to each other and to nature, that, essentially we might not have the same sort of, I guess, resources to lobby in Washington against, entrenched corporations, but we do have the power en masse of our our consumption habits.
Demand.
Yeah, and that's extremely powerful, and there is precedent for large changes of consciousness. You know, I mean, I look at smoking is one that gets held out there often. Is that we as a culture have changed largely how we've approached that notion of smoking.
And that's a perfect example of how we influence social change. Social law can be so much stronger than a political law. If we can make something, when someone smokes, it used to be cool, and now it's like, oh, ew, I can't believe, we created that.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's accountability. We have accountability to each other there. And I guess I might ask you kind of in summation, what is the relationship between community and solving for plastics?
Well, I think community is essential for solving all environmental issues, and which is like earth issues. Bringing it back to the local instead of this globalization where we're importing and exporting foods and things all over the world, and instead coming back to the local level, to our local community, and working with each other and the people, our neighbors. If disaster hits, we're going to need to know these people and who can grow food and where the water sources are. Yeah. So coming back to that local and more to your point or your question, in terms of our local or our social circles and our communities, how can we create these social norms? How can we be the ones to lead with grace instead of pressing this and making it that aggressive, even, can you sign this petition or, donate now? Right. It's not this urgent. It's more just like, this is important to me, and this is how I'm doing it. Letting it be easy for other people to adopt and take on, and just outright saying, hey, let's create this as a social norm within our community because it's important.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode with mermaid and activist Kate Nelson. You can follow along her plastic-free journey on her Instagram at Plastic-Free Mermaid. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for me, please feel free to email me at jeffk@onecommune.com. I try to respond to every message. And that's all from the Commune for this week. My name is Jeff Krasno, and I am here for you.